Title of this video should be When 5-minute jobs go horribly wrong. We basically wanted to replace this gasket in here. This gasket was either missing or non-existent. The result was that you're getting hot exhaust gases blowing on the back of here and also blowing all around the engine compartment and probably contributing to an overheating problem. So it should have been a 5-minute job to undo a couple of nuts here, here, here and here are going to turn into a major headache because these two bolts, or nuts I should say, bolts, both sheared off. So we're going to have to try and figure out how to get those out of the, where are we? We're going to have to try and figure out how to get those out of the engine. And this one here is just totally inaccessible. You can't get a socket on there because it just doesn't fit. I've tried a small socket, I've tried wrenches, tried everything, and that does not want to budge, so I'm going for plan B, which is basically to cut it off with a hacksaw. And then we've got to try and get this off and then get these out without snapping them inside the engine. And just a word of warning before you try cutting that bolt off, these are toughened bolts and they're very, very tough to get off, to cut through those bolts. So I've got to try and cut carefully through the bolt without damaging the actual exhaust manifold. Believe you me, it's much easier than it actually is. There you go. It'd be really nice as if we could get the socket on there. You see, the actual wrench touches the pipe, bends the socket off, and you just end up rounding it. Took so long to cut through. Instead of cutting through the bolt, we actually cut straight through the nut, which means that we've got to do the whole thing again, and this time try and cut the other bit off, which is a shame because I was hoping to save that nut because it's an imperial screw thread and we need 2 of them to try and back out these studs from the engine block. So I've cut through and got the old nut off, but we still have to try and figure out how to get this off because this exhaust doesn't want to go anywhere without taking the whole exhaust off. Because these bolts here are both snapped off, we're going to try and have to somehow pull that out past the bolts and pull it this way. So let's try that. Finally, after a lot of hard work, we managed to get this exhaust elbow off. Next thing we have to do is try and get these 2 bolts out, otherwise we're going to have to drill them out and re-thread. Worst case scenario for that is you could just buy a whole new piece and a whole new set of bolts. They're not that expensive and they're still available. But we'll see if we can back them out. Take off the old gasket, revealing the problem that we're going to have is getting this and this out of there without them snapping in the engine block and causing a whole load of work drilling out. Here is when you put 2 nuts on there, you should be able to turn this back the nut out the engine. Personally speaking, I think as suspected, this one is going to fight me all the way. Tried putting 2 bolts on and backing out the studs, but it just sheared off, unfortunately, leaving behind it a big problem. I think what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to drill these out and then recut the threads. I can't see another way of doing it, unfortunately. When you come to take or try and take off this exhaust elbow, you'll almost certainly snap the bolts. These are not going anywhere, despite no matter what kind of method you try and use to get the bolts out. So I'm drilling them out. And before you start, get yourself a hole punch. These hole punches, basically, you put it on the bolt and you push down, and then there's a little spring-loaded thing that will put a tiny indentation into the bolt. Then start off with the smallest drill possible. Make sure you've got the center of the bolt. If you haven't, angle the drill until you have, and then just step it up bit by bit. So I'm going to try and drill this out. Remember, put something in the exhaust manifold to stop all the metal shavings falling into the engine. To centre the drill bit. The more central you get it, the easier your life will be. That top one has been drilled out, but I don't at the moment know how far to actually drill the hole. So I'm going to have to ask somebody. What we had getting this off is we had to cut the bottom stud. The only way to reuse this piece would be to drill out those studs and re-tap the threads and buy some new studs, which we could have done, but in actual fact we were able to buy this piece on eBay for just a few pounds that came off someone's car, and it already has the studs, so that'll save us a whole load of work. Now there is only one problem. One of these studs is fine, the other stud here, the threads only go about halfway down, and the nut won't go down far enough to tighten up the gaskets. So we're going to have to re-cut the threads using this here. This is an M8 1.25. Now in actual fact, I think these are Imperial and not metric, but we've tried it on the other old one, it seems to work. So I'm now going to just try and clean up those threads, get rid of all of that there, hopefully without ruining the whole thing. When you are recutting these threads, always use a bit of penetrating oil or oil just to lubricate the cutter. When you drill out the bolts here, your drill bit's basically going to go through into an air cavity behind these holes, but what you want to make sure you don't do is get any small bits of swath, these little bits of metal inside the engine block. And one way to do that is to, when you're drilling, to put a big neodymium magnet on the drill. That'll magnetize the drill bit, basically stop any bits of metal falling into the engine, we hope. Closely you can see that my pilot holes are not particularly central to the bolt, which is going to make it quite difficult to drill those bolts out. So I'm going to try, nothing else has worked so far, but I'm going to try using some reverse thread bits, which basically might just drill out the remaining bit of bolt if we're extremely lucky. Let's see how that goes. Well, to say that as a complete waste of time would be an absolute understatement, because unfortunately both of those bolts or bits just snapped off in the holes. So now I'm back to square one. I've got to actually try and drill out the tips of these things. This car is going to fight me all the way. Could be completely wrong, but this carbide burr feels completely different from anything else I've tried. It really seems to be grinding that metal away. I put a magnet on here just to catch all the metal filings that are coming off. After less than a minute, that's completely ground out the broken off easy out, and if you can just about see the original pilot hole I drilled. This is starting to get really tight, and the last thing in the world I want to do is snap one of these off in that hole and have to start all over again. So I'm just going to double check that I've used the right size drill. Tapping out the hole, it's really important to do it slowly. Do one turn forward, a little turn back, and every now and again take the tap out and remove these bits of old thread, because if they get caught in the cutters and the threads, they will mess things up. Okay, we've got the first top hole tapped. Basically, this bolt goes all the way in far enough now to allow us to get the manifold on. We've gone very, very slowly with the tap, taking out all the old bits of thread regularly so we don't cross the threads, and more importantly so they don't fall down into the engine. We've used this big neodymium magnet here on the end of the bolt to catch any bits of metal falling into the engine. If you are going to tap a hole, my advice would be don't use one of these cheap Chinese sets. They might do the job and they're fine for cleaning up threads that already exist. What I did was went along to a company called Avon Tap and Die. They're based in Bristol, and bought a proper high quality tap for £3. It's not expensive. This goes straight into the hole and cuts cleanly without any tightness. When I tried to use this thing here, it immediately felt tight in the hole. Could be because it's a slightly different size, it could be because there's old bits of bolt still left in there and it's just not up to the job. But the last thing you want to do is snap one of those in the hole. So go out, buy yourself an M8 1.25 tap and die. As I say, this one came from Avon tap and die in Bristol. It costs £3. Using a really powerful neodymium magnet to stop the old pieces of thread falling into the hole and into the engine block. And a little trick is put an old rubber glove or some electrical tape or something around the magnet to stop the shavings actually sticking to the magnet, because it will be very difficult to ever get the job done. When you do come to tighten these bolts, you're not trying to set any world records for strength. Just tighten them enough so that the gaskets don't leak. You don't have to over tighten them and make your life difficult when you come to undo them again. So in conclusion, if you want to or have to change the gaskets on a Fiat 500, 1967 Fiat 500 exhaust elbow, don't make the mistakes that I did. For starters, the gaskets here and here are both different shapes. Okay, I initially ordered two the same size. You can get them from a company called Moto Bambino. They can supply everything from Fiat 500 parts to you. You can also get new bolts and new crush washers from them and new studs. In the event, I actually ended up buying a new piece for a few pounds off somebody who was selling one on eBay. Not if you snap the bolts, when you snap these bolts off, you're going to have to drill them out. Get yourself a decent hole punch. This will, when you press that onto the snapped off bolt, it'll put an indentation in and allow you to drill it out. The final drill size you're going to use to get the to retap the thread is going to be a 7mm. Cost you a couple of pounds. They don't often come in sets. Sets normally only go up to 6.5mm. If you come to tap the holes, use an 8mm 1.25 tap. This one came from Avon Tool and Die, cost just £3. Last but not least, make sure you've got a very strong magnet to hand so you don't end up dropping metal filings inside the cylinder head. This is a neodymium N50 magnet, means it's got a 50 kilogram pull. They're not particularly cheap, you can get them on eBay, but it's well worthwhile for magnetising your tools to avoid dropping little bits of metal.